I am Hannah, 33 years old, and a forensic accountant. My 8-year-old daughter Zoe walked into our house after spending Saturday at her Aunt Monica's place for what was supposed to be a fun cousin spa day. Zoe was wearing an oversized neon pink bucket hat pulled down low over her eyes, and her small shoulders were shaking. When I asked her what was wrong, she looked down and whispered that Aunt Monica said her natural hair was not beautiful and silky like her cousin Riley's. Then my sweet little girl lifted the hat. Zoe's beautiful, thick coils had been hacked away with kitchen scissors. Her scalp was red and blistering from a severe chemical burn, and dried blood caked the edge of her right ear. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not even pick up my phone to call my brother Miles to demand an explanation. I just walked to my laundry room, grabbed a gallon jug of industrial bleach, and got my car keys. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to deal with toxic family members who attack the people you love most. The drive to my brother's gated community took 20 minutes, but my mind was completely silent. For years, I had been the family scapegoat. I was the quiet, dark-skinned sister who worked hard for everything she had, while Miles and his wife Monica were the golden couple. Monica loved to play the perfect, wealthy influencer obsessed with status, expensive designer labels, and unrealistic beauty standards. She had always made passive-aggressive comments about Zoe's appearance, but I never thought she would cross a physical line. I pulled up to their massive modern mansion, clutching the heavy plastic jug in my hand. My husband Kendrick was at work, completely unaware that our daughter had just been injured. I marched up the sweeping marble driveway and slammed my fist against their custom oak door. Monica answered almost immediately. She was wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of expensive champagne, looking completely unbothered. When she saw me standing there, she let out an exaggerated sigh and rolled her eyes. She actually had the nerve to give me a fake, condescending smile. "Oh, Hannah, you are being dramatic as usual," she drawled, leaning against the doorframe. "I was just trying to help Zoe look a little more presentable for once. Her hair is so unmanageable. You should be thanking me for trying to fix it." I stepped inside her house without an invitation, pushing past her into the grand foyer. Her house was exactly as ostentatious as she was, but my eyes locked onto her absolute pride and joy. Displayed on a custom glass shelving unit in her pristine front hallway was her collection of Birkin bags. 6 bags in various rare leathers and colors worth at least $200,000. It was her favorite backdrop for her social media videos, the ultimate symbol of the immense wealth she married into. "You did not try to fix her hair," I said, my voice dangerously calm and steady. "You burned her scalp with a chemical relaxer, and when you panicked, you chopped her beautiful hair off with scissors." Monica scoffed, taking a sip of her champagne. "Prove it. It was an accident. Now get out of my house before I call security. You do not belong here, and quite frankly, neither does that messy kid of yours." She gestured vaguely toward the door with her free hand, dismissing me like a servant. I looked at her, then looked at the glass shelves holding her pristine status symbols. I did not say another word. I unscrewed the cap of the industrial bleach. Monica's arrogant smirk vanished the second she realized what I was holding in my hands. She opened her mouth to scream, but before any sound could escape her throat, I swung my arm and hurled the entire gallon of toxic chemicals directly onto the open shelves. The thick liquid splashed violently across the exotic leathers, instantly bubbling and searing into the bright orange, white, and black materials. The smell of chlorine and melting dye filled the foyer within seconds. The bags hissed as the bleach ate through the expensive finishes. Monica dropped her champagne glass. It shattered on the polished marble floor. She let out a horrific guttural shriek and dropped to her knees, clawing at the air as if I had thrown the acid on her own skin. "My bags," she screamed, sobbing hysterically and reaching for the ruined leather. I stood over her, looking down at the smoking destruction. "Now they match your personality," I said coldly. Monica scrambled backward across the polished marble floor, her manicured hands hovering helplessly over the dissolving leather of her precious bags. She pulled her phone from the pocket of her silk robe with trembling fingers and immediately dialed the emergency line, screaming hysterically into the receiver that an unstable woman had broken into her home and launched a violent chemical attack. The police arrived at the gated estate within 10 minutes. Two uniformed officers stepped into the grand foyer, instantly overwhelmed by the harsh, toxic fumes of the industrial bleach. They immediately separated us firmly, asking me to step outside onto the front porch, while they tried to calm Monica down and assess the property damage. I stood alone on the massive stone steps, breathing in the cool evening air, feeling absolutely no remorse for what I had done. 20 minutes later, a sleek black Mercedes SUV screeched to a sudden halt in the circular driveway. My brother Miles jumped out, followed closely by our parents. They must have been having an expensive dinner together, which was entirely typical for them. I was rarely invited to their exclusive weekend dinners anymore. Miles did not even bother to look at me as he sprinted up the steps. He rushed past me straight into the house to comfort his crying wife. My mother and father, however, stopped right in front of me on the porch, their expressions hardened with immediate judgment. My mother crossed her arms tightly, her heavy designer jewelry clinking together in the quiet night. "Hannah, what in the world is wrong with you?" she demanded, her voice dripping with utter disgust. "Have you completely lost your mind this time?" I looked directly at the woman who was supposed to protect me and my child. "Did Monica happen to tell you what she did to your granddaughter today?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level and cold. "Did she mention that she put adult chemical relaxers on an 8-year-old child without my permission or knowledge? Did she tell you Zoe currently has second-degree burns on her scalp and that her beautiful hair was hacked off with kitchen scissors?" My father let out an exasperated sigh, shaking his head dismissively. "Oh, stop being so incredibly dramatic, Hannah," he said, adjusting his expensive gold watch. "Monica called us in tears before the police even got here. She said she was just trying to help tame that wild hair of Zoe's. You know the child always looks unkempt when you bring her around. Monica was simply doing you a favor by making her look presentable for once, and there was a minor accident with the product. You are blowing this completely out of proportion to get attention." A minor accident. I repeated his ridiculous words aloud, letting them hang in the heavy air between us. "She chemically burned her scalp. There is literal blood dried on her ear." My mother stepped closer, lowering her voice into that familiar, condescending tone she had expertly used on me my entire life. "Listen to yourself right now, Hannah. You have always been so deeply insecure and incredibly jealous of Monica. We all see it clearly. You resent her because she comes from a very good family, because she has endless money, and yes, because she has lighter skin and looser curls. You are projecting your own bitter insecurities onto a simple, well-meaning mistake. Monica has a heart of gold. She was trying to bond with Zoe. And you repay her kindness by destroying hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of her personal property." I stared silently at my mother, the sheer audacity of her words washing over me like ice water. They were doing it again. It was the exact same toxic gaslighting I had endured since childhood. Miles had always been their golden boy, the handsome, charismatic son who could do absolutely no wrong in their eyes. When he married Monica, a light-skinned woman from a wealthy, politically connected family, she instantly became the golden daughter-in-law. I was the dark-skinned, strictly independent daughter who asked uncomfortable questions and refused to fall blindly in line. I was their designated scapegoat, the one they conveniently blamed whenever their perfect suburban image threatened to crack. Miles walked aggressively out onto the porch, slamming the heavy front door shut behind him. His face was twisted with pure rage. "The police are leaving because I told them we would handle this internally as a family matter," he snarled, pointing a threatening finger directly at my face. "But do not think for one single second that you are getting away with this. You are a deeply unhinged woman who just attacked my innocent wife, and I promise you will pay dearly for it." Miles stepped closer until he was inches from my face, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter under the pressure. "I am going to sue you into absolute oblivion, Hannah. He spat, his voice trembling with unchecked rage. Those bags were rare collectibles worth over $200,000. I am calling my legal team the second the sun comes up tomorrow. I am going to put a massive lien on your house, drain your miserable little savings account, and bankrupt you and your husband. You are going to be paying Monica back for the rest of your pathetic life. I did not flinch or step back. I let him finish his arrogant tantrum, maintaining cold, unbroken eye contact. My heart was pounding heavily against my ribs, but my professional training as a forensic accountant kept my voice completely devoid of emotion. Go ahead, Miles, I challenged him softly, tilting my head. Call your high-priced lawyers, file the lawsuit, drag me into civil court. But before you make that call, I want you to think very carefully about what happens during the discovery phase of a major financial lawsuit. Every single bank account, every shell company, every offshore transfer, and every tax return attached to your name and the family trust will be subpoenaed. They will be subjected to a microscopic public audit. Are you absolutely certain you want a certified forensic accountant tearing through your financial history on the public record for a judge to see? I watched the color drain completely out of his face. His confident, aggressive posture faltered for a fraction of a second. His eyes darted away from mine, a flash of genuine panic betraying the polished, wealthy exterior he worked so hard to maintain in front of our parents. He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. I knew it. I had suspected for a while that his lavish lifestyle did not match his declared income. He was hiding something massive in those accounts, and my bluff had just struck a major nerve. Without waiting for his recovery, I turned on my heel and walked down the stone steps. Do not ever come near my daughter again, I called over my shoulder, walking straight to my car. I got into my vehicle, locked the doors, and drove away from the sprawling estate. The fierce adrenaline that had fueled my confrontation was quickly fading, replaced by a deep, agonizing ache in my chest. I called Kendrick on the way back to our house. I gave him the short, terrifying version of what had happened, my voice finally cracking under the weight of it all. He dropped everything at his office and promised to meet me at our front door. When Kendrick and I rushed into our living room, Zoe was sitting on the couch, clutching her pink bucket hat and crying softly. Her shoulders shook with every breath. Kendrick dropped to his knees, his face twisted in pure devastation as he gently scooped her up into his arms, kissing her forehead. We did not waste another second asking questions. We carried her out to the car and drove straight to the pediatric emergency room at the nearest hospital. The wait felt like an absolute eternity. We sat under the harsh fluorescent lights of the waiting area, watching our sweet girl flinch in pain every time she shifted her head against Kendrick's chest. The faint, bitter smell of harsh chemicals was still clinging to her clothes. Finally, a pediatric specialist called us into a brightly lit examination room. Dr. Evans was a gentle, soft-spoken woman who immediately tried to put Zoe at ease with a warm smile. But as she carefully parted the remaining sections of Zoe's ruined hair to examine the scalp, her professional demeanor shifted into intense, visible concern. She immediately called for a nurse to bring a specialized saline flush and a severe burn kit. Who exactly did this to your daughter? Dr. Evans asked, looking directly at Kendrick and me with a hardened expression. My sister-in-law. I answered, my stomach twisting into a tight knot. She claimed it was an accident with scissors while trying to trim her hair. Dr. Evans shook her head firmly, her expression grim as she pulled on a pair of sterile gloves. This is not a scissor accident. The cuts are erratic because someone was frantically trying to remove the hair after the catastrophic damage was already done. What we are looking at here are severe second-degree chemical burns. Someone applied an industrial-strength adult chemical hair relaxer directly to her sensitive scalp and left it on far beyond any standard safety margin. The chemicals have literally eaten away the top layers of her skin. Kendrick let out a sharp, angry breath, gripping the edge of the examination table until his knuckles turned white. Will her hair grow back? He asked, his voice thick with suppressed fury. Dr. Evans sighed, applying a thick, soothing antibiotic ointment to the inflamed red blisters. In most areas, yes. But the trauma to the hair follicles in the deepest burn spots is severe. It will take months of dermatological treatments, and she will likely have permanent scarring behind her right ear, where the caustic chemical pooled and sat on the skin. This was not a simple mistake. The product was deliberately applied and recklessly neglected. The heavy silence in the examination room was deafening. I felt all the air leave my lungs. Kendrick pressed his forehead against the cold cinder-block wall, taking deep, ragged breaths to stop himself from screaming out loud. We knew Monica was incredibly vain and prejudiced against our darker skin and natural features, but this was a completely different level of cruelty. This was a calculated, vicious assault on a defenseless child. Dr. Evans stepped away to write prescriptions for heavy antibiotics, burn creams, and pain medication. A nurse carefully wrapped Zoe's injured head in soft, sterile bandages. Sitting on the oversized hospital bed, my beautiful daughter looked like a tiny, fragile soldier returning from a brutal war. Kendrick sat on the edge of the mattress, gently rocking her and humming a soft melody until the strong pain medication finally forced her exhausted eyes closed. I backed away into the corner of the room and sank into a stiff plastic visitor chair. My hands were shaking so violently that I had to interlock my fingers and press them hard against my knees. I needed something to anchor my mind before I completely lost my grip on reality. I pulled my phone from my purse, intending to check work messages to calm my rapidly racing thoughts. Instead, the lock screen was dominated by a high-priority email notification from Claire, the boutique talent agent who occasionally booked small local modeling jobs for Zoe. A few months ago, we had submitted Zoe for a major commercial casting call just for fun. We kept it a total secret from my overbearing parents, and my brother, knowing they would just find a way to criticize or belittle the effort. I opened the email. The bolded subject line immediately caught my attention. It read, "Incredible news from Target National Campaign." My eyes scanned the text rapidly, my heart dropping into my stomach with every single sentence I read. Claire wrote that the executive casting directors at Target had finally made their ultimate decision for a massive upcoming nationwide advertising campaign specifically designed to celebrate natural beauty, diversity, and authentic textured hair. The directors reviewed thousands of audition tapes from child models across the entire country. They explicitly stated they did not want children with chemically altered hair or heavily manipulated styling. They were searching for a girl with authentic, thick, beautiful coils, and they had chosen my Zoe. She was selected to be the lead face of the national television and print campaign. The attached contract guaranteed her face would be on massive billboards in every major city in America. The commercial shoot was scheduled to take place in exactly 4 days. I read the second paragraph of Claire's email, and the puzzle pieces violently locked into place. Claire mentioned that she had received a highly aggressive, screaming phone call earlier that same afternoon from my sister-in-law. Monica had apparently used her industry connections to track down the casting results. Monica had submitted her own daughter Riley for the exact same Target campaign. Monica was completely arrogant, entirely convinced that Riley's lighter complexion and straightened silky hair would automatically win her the highly coveted spot. When the agency explicitly rejected Riley because she did not fit the natural texture requirements of the campaign, Monica absolutely lost her mind. She demanded to know who had beaten her perfect daughter for the lead role. Through a loose-lipped casting assistant, Monica found out the winner was Zoe. My blood turned to absolute ice. The horrific realization washed over me. Monica inviting Zoe over for a fun cousin spa day was never about family bonding. It was a premeditated trap. Monica was so obsessed with status, so deeply furious, that her own daughter had been rejected in favor of the dark-skinned niece she constantly looked down upon, that she decided to take matters into her own hands. She intentionally burned Zoe's scalp. She purposely hacked away her beautiful natural hair with scissors. She wanted to physically disfigure my daughter's face and destroy her hair right before the biggest commercial shoot of her life. Monica wanted to make absolutely sure that Zoe would be disqualified from the Target campaign out of pure malicious jealousy. I sat alone in that hospital chair, staring blindly at the glowing screen of my phone. She had permanently scarred my baby out of spite. The tears I had been fighting back all evening suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I was a forensic accountant. I spent my entire career dismantling corrupt people by finding their weakest points and exposing them. Monica had just declared a war she could not possibly win. Kendrick and I brought Zoe home the next morning after a sleepless night in the pediatric ward. We carried her directly to her bedroom, carefully tucking her under her favorite weighted blanket so she could finally rest without the harsh hospital monitors beeping in the background. I walked into the kitchen to make a pot of black coffee, my mind racing with strategies and timelines. I planned to contact my lawyer and forward Dr. Evans's medical report directly to the police. I wanted Monica arrested for child endangerment before the sun went down. But before the coffee machine finished brewing, a sharp knock echoed through our front hallway. I assumed it was Kendrick's mother coming to help us watch Zoe, but when I opened the heavy wooden door, I was greeted by two strangers. A stern-looking woman in a crisp gray pantsuit held a leather binder flanked by a uniformed police officer. "Are you Hannah?" the woman asked, her tone entirely devoid of warmth. "I am Agent Collins with Child Protective Services. We received an emergency priority report regarding the safety and physical well-being of your 8-year-old daughter Zoe. We need to come inside immediately." My heart slammed against my ribs. I stood frozen in the doorway for a fraction of a second before stepping aside to let them in. Kendrick walked out of the hallway, his exhausted face hardening into instant alarm when he saw the police officer standing in our foyer. Agent Collins did not waste time with pleasantries. She opened her leather binder and read from a freshly printed document. "We received a highly detailed anonymous hotline tip early this morning. The caller alleged that you deliberately applied caustic chemical solvents to your daughter's scalp, resulting in severe physical disfigurement. The caller further claimed that you orchestrated this horrific injury to extort a large financial settlement from your wealthy brother and his wife." The sheer audacity of the accusation hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Monica had beaten me to the punch. She knew I would go to the authorities, so she executed a preemptive strike, twisting the narrative to make me look like an unhinged, abusive extortionist. It was a classic sociopathic manipulation tactic. She was using the state's child protection system as a weapon to shield herself from the consequences of her own violence. Agent Collins looked up from her notes, her eyes scanning our clean, well-furnished living room with intense scrutiny. The anonymous reporter provided very specific details. She continued, her voice sharp and calculating. "They stated you showed up at your brother's home last night in a highly erratic state, violently destroying hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of property when they refused to pay your ransom demands. We need to see the child right now, and we need to inspect the premises for hazardous chemicals." Kendrick stepped forward, his protective instincts flaring as he placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "This is a complete fabrication," he stated, his voice vibrating with barely contained anger. "My wife's sister-in-law is the one who burned our daughter. We just spent the entire night at the pediatric emergency room getting her treated for the assault. We have the hospital paperwork right here." Agent Collins remained entirely unmoved. She had clearly dealt with defensive parents before. "I need to see the hospital reports, but I also need to visually confirm the child's current condition and living environment," she insisted coldly. "An emergency room visit does not automatically absolve you of inflicting the initial injury, especially when financial extortion is listed as the primary motive. Please take me to her room immediately." I led her down the hallway, my hands trembling with profound terror and rage. We walked into her bedroom. My sweet baby was fast asleep, her head wrapped in thick white medical gauze. Agent Collins took extensive notes, her cold eyes missing nothing. She photographed the medical supplies on the nightstand, then demanded to inspect our bathroom's searching cabinets for the chemical relaxer that caused the burns. She interrogated us for over an hour, asking highly invasive questions about our financial stability, our household income, and our relationship with my family. She actively looked for cracks, searching for any sign that we were desperate enough to harm our own flesh and blood. I answered every single question with absolute precision, using my forensic accounting background to provide exact figures proving our financial independence. But the devastating reality of the situation was suffocating. We were being investigated by the state. One wrong word, and they could legally take Zoe out of our home. Monica had pushed me to the absolute edge of the abyss, betting that I would panic and fall. She severely underestimated my balance. Agent Collins finally packed up her leather binder and walked out of our house, leaving behind a suffocating silence. The weekend dissolved into a blur of applying burn ointments, administering antibiotics, and holding Zoe while she cried herself to sleep. By Monday morning, I thought the worst of the immediate shock was over. I was completely wrong. The nightmare was just expanding its reach. Kendrick works as a senior administrator for the local public school district, a job that requires an absolutely spotless background check. At 9 in the morning, his phone rang. I watched from the kitchen counter as his broad shoulders slumped and his face turned ash gray. He hung up the phone and looked at me with hollow eyes. The school board had been notified. It is standard legal protocol in the state for Child Protective Services to cross-reference their active abuse investigations with state employment records, particularly for anyone working in the education sector. Because Kendrick resided in the same house, where a severe physical abuse allegation was currently under active investigation, the district had no choice. They placed him on immediate administrative leave, suspended without pay, effective instantly pending the final outcome of the CPS inquiry. Monica had not just attacked my child, she had actively sabotaged our primary source of income and threatened my husband's hard-earned career. The financial reality of the situation crashed down on me. We were staring down the barrel of massive legal fees to fight the CPS case, expensive dermatological treatments for Zoe, and now we were abruptly reduced to a single income. Kendrick sat at the kitchen table, burying his face in his hands. He was a proud man who had dedicated his life to protecting and educating children, and now he was being publicly treated like a potential child abuser. Meanwhile, down the hallway, Zoe was terrified to even look in the mirror. She refused to take off the soft medical caps we bought her, and she flinched every time she heard a loud noise. My family was bleeding out emotionally and financially. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. The caller ID flashed with my mother's name. I answered it foolishly, hoping that maybe, just maybe, she was calling to check on her injured granddaughter. Instead, her voice came through the speaker, sharp and full of venom. "Well, Hannah, I hope you are finally happy with the absolute mess you have created," she started, not even bothering to say hello. "Miles just called your father. He told us that CPS is at your house because of your little stunt with the bleach. Do you see what happens when you let your petty jealousy get completely out of control? You are dragging this entire family's good name through the mud." I gripped the edge of the granite counter so hard my fingers cramped. "Mom, Monica is the one who called CPS on us." I fired back, my voice shaking with fury. "She filed a false report to cover up the fact that she chemically burned Zoe. Kendrick just lost his job because of her lies. How can you possibly be defending her right now?" My mother let out a loud theatrical sigh. "Stop playing the victim, Hannah. Monica is terrified of you. You broke into her home and destroyed her property. She only called the authorities because she is genuinely worried about the unstable environment you are providing for Zoe. Your father and I have discussed it, and there is only one way to fix this before it ruins your brother's reputation permanently. You are going to drive over to their house today, and you are going to issue a formal public apology to Monica. You will agree to pay for those designer bags in full. If you do that, Miles will convince Monica to call her contact at CPS and tell them it was all a misunderstanding." The absolute sickness of her proposal echoed in my ears. They were holding my family hostage. They were using my husband's career and my daughter's safety as leverage to force me to bow down to the woman who had violently assaulted my child. They wanted me to grovel to accept the role of the crazy, jealous sister, all so Monica could keep her pristine image intact. They wanted me entirely isolated, broke, and humiliated. I did not yell. I did not curse. I simply ended the call and placed the phone face down on the counter. The tears I had been fighting for 3 days finally stopped threatening to fall. In their place, a cold, calculated rage took complete control of my mind. They wanted to use financial pressure to break me. They thought cornering a forensic accountant regarding money was a brilliant strategy. They had no idea I was about to dismantle their entire lives. I walked straight from the kitchen into my home office and locked the door behind me. If Child Protective Services wanted a comprehensive look into my financial stability, I was going to give them a masterpiece. I turned on my desktop computer and pulled my heavy, fireproof filing cabinet away from the wall. I needed to compile 5 years of bank statements, tax returns, investment portfolios, and property deeds to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Kendrick and I provided a secure upper-middle-class household for our daughter. I started neatly stacking Kendrick's pay stubs and my corporate salary records on the mahogany desk. Then I reached into the back of the bottom drawer and pulled out the thick manila envelope labeled Family Trust. My grandfather had been a brilliant real estate developer. When he passed away 8 years ago, he left behind a substantial trust fund designed to generate generational wealth for his descendants. Because Miles was the older brother and the golden child, my parents convinced my grandfather to name Miles as the sole managing trustee. My brother was put in complete control of the investments, the property liquidations, and the annual disbursements. Every spring, Miles's expensive corporate accountant sent me a Schedule K-1 tax form, which simply reported my share of the trust's income for the year. Over the last 3 years, Miles had repeatedly claimed the commercial real estate market was taking a massive hit, which he used to justify why my annual disbursement checks were getting significantly smaller. I had always taken him at his word, because despite our personal differences, I never thought my own brother would actively steal from my child's future. I laid the last 5 years of K-1 forms side by side across my desk to scan them for the CPS dossier. I grabbed a red pen and my heavy-duty calculator. As a forensic accountant, I spent 40 hours a week hunting down corporate fraud, money laundering, and hidden assets for major firms. My eyes are professionally trained to catch microscopic numerical inconsistencies that normal people scroll right past. Within 10 minutes of reviewing the tax documents, a cold chill ran down my spine. The math was fundamentally broken. I leaned closer to the desk, my eyes darting between the gross income reported on the trust and the operating expenses Miles was claiming. The capital gains from a commercial plaza my grandfather owned in downtown Atlanta had been liquidated 2 years ago, but the revenue never hit the disbursement line. Instead, I noticed a massive spike in a section labeled as external contractor fees and property management disbursements. Millions of dollars were being aggressively funneled out of the trust's gross revenue before the net profits were divided among the family members. I quickly logged into my secure public records database, a specialized investigative tool I used for my corporate clients. I typed in the federal tax identification numbers listed on the K-1 forms next to these massive management fees. 3 different limited liability companies popped up on my screen: Apex Holdings, LLC, Blue Ridge Consulting, and Summit Management Group. I pulled the state registration records for all 3 companies. They were entirely phantom corporations. They had no physical office addresses, no listed employees, and no digital footprints. They were registered to a generic post office box in Delaware, a state notorious for corporate secrecy laws. But criminals always leave a trace if you know exactly where to dig. I cross-referenced the registered agent's signatures on the Delaware filing documents with county property records. The registered agent for all 3 phantom companies was a man named David Rollins. I recognized that name instantly. He was Monica's incredibly sleazy younger cousin who worked as a low-level paralegal. The air left my lungs as the sheer scale of the betrayal crystallized on my monitor. Miles was not just mismanaging the trust due to market fluctuations. He was actively embezzling millions of dollars from his own family. He was creating fake vendor companies, signing off on exorbitant management fees paid out to these phantom LLCs, and routing the money straight into accounts controlled by Monica's relatives. They were systematically bleeding my grandfather's legacy entirely dry. That was how Monica afforded her $200,000 purse collections, her luxury cars, and her sprawling, gated mansion. They were living like royalty using the money that rightfully belonged to me and Zoe. I sat back in my leather chair, the red pen snapping in half under my grip. My parents had just demanded I apologize to the woman who burned my daughter, threatening me with financial ruin. They thought I was the struggling sister. They had no idea I now held the key to the federal prison cell Miles would occupy. I stared at the Delaware corporate records glowing on my monitor. Taking this evidence to the police right now would be premature. White-collar crime requires undeniable proof. The tax forms and the shell company registrations raised red flags, but they were not the smoking gun. To secure a federal indictment and guarantee Miles would face mandatory prison time, I needed the master ledger. I needed the transaction history showing the routing numbers transferring my grandfather's wealth into offshore accounts. I knew exactly where Miles kept his primary financial server. He was far too paranoid to upload his illegal ledgers to a cloud service. He kept a localized encrypted hard drive locked inside the massive mahogany desk in his home office. Accessing it remotely was impossible because the local network was entirely air-gapped from the public internet. To get the definitive proof, I had to physically breach his office, bypass his local firewall, and download the data directly onto a flash drive. Getting inside their heavily secured mansion, especially after I had just destroyed Monica's prized handbag collection, seemed completely impossible. They had expensive security cameras on every single corner of the property. I needed a legitimate invitation. I needed them to actively open the front door and welcome me inside. And to do that, I had to give them exactly what their massive, fragile egos desperately craved: total and utter submission. I walked out of my home office and found Kendrick sitting quietly at the kitchen table. I placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and explained exactly what I had found in the trust documents. I told him my plan. He looked up at me, his eyes tired but filled with unwavering trust. "Do what you have to do," he whispered, pulling me into a tight embrace. "Bring them down." With my husband's support locked in, I walked back to my desk, picked up my phone, and prepared to deliver the greatest acting performance of my life. I dialed my mother's number. When she answered with a sharp, impatient sigh, I forced my voice to tremble. I let out a loud, jagged sob. "Mom," I gasped, making sure to sound broken and hysterical. "Please do not hang up on me." My mother paused. "What is going on, Hannah?" she asked, her tone shifting slightly from anger to cautious curiosity. "I need help," I cried, gripping the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned white. Child Protective Services was just here. "Kendrick has been suspended from the school district without pay. We are completely out of money. I am terrified they are going to take Zoe away from me. You were right about everything. I let my jealousy ruin my life, and I made a terrible mistake. I am so sorry." The silence on the line was thick with smug satisfaction. I could practically hear my mother nodding, enjoying my total collapse. "I told you this would happen, Hannah," she said softly, her voice dripping with maternal superiority. "You always have to learn things the hard way." I sniffled, wiping away tears. "I will do whatever you want," I begged her. "I will get a second job. I will apologize to Monica in front of whoever she wants. Just please tell Miles to call the investigator and say it was a misunderstanding. We cannot lose Kendrick's income." My mother let out a dramatic breath. "Well, I am glad you have finally come to your senses and realized the damage you have caused. I will speak to your brother, but an apology over the phone is not going to cut it. Monica is deeply traumatized by your outburst. You are going to have to look her in the eye and beg for her forgiveness." That is exactly what I was counting on. "Yes," I whispered weakly. "Whatever she needs. Please just let me come over and make things right." My mother told me she would call Miles and arrange a formal dinner. She hung up the phone, completely convinced she had successfully broken my spirit and forced me back into my designated role as the family loser. I lowered the phone from my ear. The fake tears vanished instantly. My face was completely dry, and my heart was beating with a slow, rhythmic calm. I turned back to my computer screens. I opened my secure software vault and pulled out a high-capacity encrypted flash drive. I loaded it with an aggressive data cloning program designed specifically to bypass security and extract hidden ledgers in a matter of minutes. Monica and Miles mistakenly thought they had cornered a desperate, defenseless mother. They were about to invite a highly trained forensic accountant directly into their private sanctuary. I was going to burn their fake empire entirely to the ground. Thursday evening arrived with a suffocating heaviness. I kissed Zoe on the forehead, leaving her safely at home with Kendrick. Driving alone up the winding path to my brother's gated community, I rehearsed every line of my performance. When I pulled into the circular driveway, the opulence of their home felt like a slap in the face. Their 6-bedroom estate was brightly lit, projecting an image of perfection. I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse containing the encrypted flash drive, and walked up the front steps. My mother opened the oak door before I could ring the bell. She looked me up and down with an approving nod, pleased I was wearing a plain dress. She whispered a sharp reminder to swallow my pride before ushering me into the dining room. The space was absurdly lavish, decorated with fresh imported orchids and a crystal chandelier that caught the light of a dozen expensive candles. Miles was sitting at the head of the mahogany table nursing a glass of scotch. He did not bother to greet me. He just offered a cold smirk. But it was Monica who truly commanded the room. She was holding court draped in an emerald green silk gown that probably cost more than Kendrick's entire annual salary. She leaned into her role as the deeply wounded victim, dramatically sighing and fanning herself while my father poured her a glass of sparkling water. The tension in the room was absolute poison. "Hannah," my father said loudly, his deep voice entirely devoid of warmth. "Sit down right now. We have a lot to discuss before dinner." I pulled out a heavy wooden chair at the far end of the massive table, making sure to keep my eyes lowered in fake shame. I needed them to believe I was completely defeated. Monica let out a theatrical gasp and pressed a manicured hand against her chest the moment I sat down. "I cannot believe you have the sheer nerve to show your face in my home after what you did," Monica said, her voice shaking with fake trauma. "My beautiful bags were completely destroyed. My peace of mind is entirely gone. I have barely slept a wink since your unhinged attack." I took a slow, deep breath and delivered the words I knew she needed to hear. "You are absolutely right, Monica," I said softly, forcing my voice to sound incredibly fragile. "I crossed a terrible line, and there is no excuse for my behavior. I was frantic about Zoe, and I let my jealousy get the better of me. I deeply resent your perfect life and your success. I always have. Attacking you and destroying your property was unforgivable. I am begging for your mercy. Please, Monica. Kendrick lost his job, and CPS is threatening to take my daughter away forever. We have absolutely nothing left. I am so incredibly sorry today." The profound silence that followed my humiliating speech was absolutely deafening. I kept my head bowed, but my eyes were constantly moving under my lashes. While my parents and my brother eagerly absorbed my complete surrender, my trained forensic eye was rapidly scanning the entire perimeter of the room. I mentally logged the precise position of the dome security camera tucked discreetly into the corner molding above the chandelier. I noted the blind spot near the archway leading directly to the main staircase. I spotted the primary internet router blinking aggressively on a side table completely exposed. Monica let out a long, satisfied sigh. The sheer pleasure of watching me grovel was radiating from every single pore of her body. She sat up a little straighter, her fake trauma instantly vanishing into thin air. "Well, it takes a very big person to finally admit their own bitter jealousy," she said condescendingly, swirling the ice in her glass. "I suppose I can find it in my heart to forgive you, Hannah. But you are going to have to earn your way back into this family, starting tonight." My mother beamed with absolute pride, clapping her hands together softly. "Oh, Monica, you are just so incredibly gracious and forgiving," my mother praised her completely, ignoring the fact that Monica had permanently scarred her own granddaughter just a few days ago. Miles nodded in firm agreement, finally taking a sip of his scotch. "We will call CPS in the morning and tell them it was a huge misunderstanding," Miles said flatly. "But do not ever forget who holds the true power in this family again, Hannah." I nodded meekly. gripping my purse tightly in my lap, where the encrypted drive rested quietly. They thought they had easily won this little war tonight. They had absolutely no idea I was just patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Dinner was served by a private chef, an absurd display of wealth consisting of seared scallops, imported truffles, and gold leaf garnishes. I picked at my food, keeping my head slightly lowered perfectly, playing the part of the broken woman. The dining room was suffocatingly quiet, save for the clinking of heavy silver forks against fine china. Monica, clearly emboldened by my earlier performance of complete submission, decided that my simple apology was not nearly enough entertainment for the evening. She wanted to break me entirely in front of an audience. She tapped her crystal wine glass with a silver spoon, demanding the table's absolute attention. Miles leaned back in his expensive leather chair, smiling proudly at his wife. My parents stopped eating immediately, looking at Monica with pure, undivided adoration. "I have some incredibly exciting news to share with the family tonight," Monica announced, her voice echoing loudly in the large room. "After months of tireless research and elite development, I am officially launching my own luxury children's skincare brand. It is going to be called Riley's Glow, named after our beautiful, perfect daughter." She paused for dramatic effect while my mother gasped in absolute delight. "It is a completely organic, vegan, and cruelty-free line designed specifically for sensitive skin," Monica continued, waving her manicured hand. "The packaging is a gorgeous minimalist gold and white. We are hosting a massive exclusive launch party next weekend with top influencers and venture capitalists. Target is already looking at our portfolio to feature us in their stores nationwide." I gripped my heavy linen napkin tightly under the table. Hearing her mention Target sent a fresh, violent wave of disgust through my veins. She had literally burned my 8-year-old daughter's scalp with caustic chemicals just to eliminate the competition for her brand's visual aesthetic. But I kept my face entirely blank. "Oh, Monica, that is simply brilliant!" My mother gushed warmly, reaching over the table to squeeze Monica's hand. "You have always had such a wonderful, sharp mind for business. The branding alone sounds so incredibly sophisticated. You are going to take the entire market by storm." Monica smiled warmly at my mother before turning her sharp, calculating eyes directly onto me. "Thank you, Elaine. And you know, I was thinking about Hannah's little financial crisis earlier today. Since Kendrick is out of work, and you are going to be drowning in legal fees from destroying my property, I wanted to extend an olive branch. A real opportunity for you to earn your keep." My father nodded approvingly. "That is very generous of you, Monica. Listen closely to her, Hannah." Monica took a slow sip of her expensive wine. "We are setting up a massive distribution warehouse downtown to handle all the online orders. We need someone to handle the overnight cleaning shifts, mopping the concrete floors, taking out the heavy trash bins, scrubbing the employee bathrooms. It pays minimum wage, of course, but every little penny helps when you are facing total bankruptcy. You can consider it a humble start to paying off the massive debt you owe me. It builds character." The sheer disrespect was staggering. My own parents sat there completely fine with my sister-in-law offering me a job scrubbing toilets to pay off a debt funded by money stolen from my own inheritance. I looked up, forcing my eyes to appear wide and desperately grateful. I pasted a fragile, thankful smile onto my face. "Monica, that is so incredibly kind of you," I said, my voice thick with fake emotion. "I would be absolutely honored to work for you. Thank you for giving me a second chance." Monica's smile widened into a triumphant, arrogant grin. She had officially won. She had conquered the rebellious sister. She reached across the wide table to grab the open bottle of red wine, her eyes gleaming with absolute superiority. That was my exact cue. As I reached forward under the guise of passing my empty water glass, I intentionally bumped my elbow hard against Monica's arm. The crystal wine bottle tipped forward, splashing a wave of dark red liquid directly onto the lap of my light beige dress. "Oh my gosh," I gasped, jumping up from my chair and furiously dabbing at the red stain. "I am so incredibly clumsy today. I am so sorry, Monica." Monica rolled her eyes in irritation, pulling her emerald silk gown away. "Honestly, Hannah, you are a walking disaster," she snapped. "Go to the guest bathroom upstairs and scrub that out before it ruins the chair. I nodded frantically, backing away. "I am so sorry," I repeated, walking quickly out of the room. The moment my back turned, the frightened expression melted off my face. I gripped my purse tightly, turning down the dimly lit hallway toward his locked home office. What are your thoughts on how smoothly Hannah navigated this trap? The dimly lit hallway was dead quiet as I slipped away from the dining room. I moved quickly, my flat shoes making zero noise on the thick runner rug. I reached the heavy oak door of Miles's home office. As expected, it was locked. But Miles was a creature of predictable, arrogant habit. I ran my fingers along the top of the doorframe, finding the spare key he always kept hidden there. I unlocked the door, slipped inside, and quietly locked it behind me. The office was dark, illuminated only by the faint moonlight spilling through the massive bay windows. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I walked straight to his mahogany desk and woke up the computer. The screen flared to life, illuminating my face with a harsh blue glow. A password prompt popped up on the screen. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from Kendrick. "I could not let you walk into the lion's den alone. My mother is watching Zoe. I am ringing the doorbell right now." A second later, the deep chime of the front door echoed through the massive house. I let out a breath of pure relief. I could faintly hear the scrape of chairs downstairs as my family reacted to the unexpected visitor. Kendrick was playing the broken husband, begging for forgiveness to keep their eyes off the stairs. He was buying me the time I desperately needed. I turned my attention back to the monitor. Miles thought he was a financial genius, but his cybersecurity was laughably basic. His localized desktop was secured by a simple alphanumeric password. I regularly cracked corporate firewalls that cost millions. Bypassing this took 2 minutes. I booted from a secure USB operating system, bypassing the login screen and gaining full root access. I navigated straight to the hidden partitions. Miles had disguised a hidden folder as temporary system files, but the file size was a massive giveaway. 200 gigabytes of data. I opened the directory. There they were. The master ledgers, offshore routing numbers, forged signature scans, and bank statements from the Phantom LLCs. It was the blueprint of his entire criminal enterprise. I pulled the high-capacity encrypted flash drive from my purse and shoved it into the USB port. I launched the data cloning software. A sleek black progress bar appeared on the screen, calculating the transfer rate. 10%. My heart hammered against my ribs. I kept my eyes glued to the screen, willing the numbers to move faster. Downstairs, I could hear Kendrick's deep voice echoing up the stairwell. He was putting on a masterclass in distraction. I heard him apologizing to Monica, asking my father for advice on the school board. It was the perfect bait. My father loved nothing more than lecturing other men on their failures. My father's booming voice began delivering a harsh reprimand, effectively trapping the entire room in his arrogant monologue. 35%. The transfer rate dipped as it hit highly encrypted files. I clenched my jaw, my hands resting flat on the cool mahogany desk to keep them from shaking. Every second I sat in this leather chair was a massive risk. If Miles decided to come upstairs to grab a cigar or show off his office to Kendrick, I would be caught red-handed with federal evidence. 60%. The black progress bar crawled with agonizing slowness. I glanced at the small digital clock on the bottom corner of the monitor. 3 minutes had passed since I left the dining room. Monica would expect me to return from the bathroom soon. If she noticed I was missing for too long, her natural paranoia would undoubtedly kick in. 85%. The voices downstairs suddenly shifted. The low rumble of Kendrick's voice was interrupted by the sharp, piercing sound of Monica's laughter. Then the distinct sound of footsteps clicking rapidly against the hardwood floor of the foyer. Someone was walking toward the main staircase. 92%. I leaned closer to the screen, practically willing the data to move through the physical drive. The footsteps were on the first step now. 96%. Come on, I whispered into the dark room. 98, 99, 100. The software flashed a bright green completion banner. I instantly yanked the flash drive from the port and shoved it deep into my purse. I pulled my secondary USB from the computer, forcing the system to instantly reboot back to the standard locked login screen. I grabbed my heavy leather purse and practically flew across the dark room to the locked office door. I held my breath, turning the deadbolt as silently as humanly possible, just as the sharp footsteps finally reached the top of the landing directly outside. I pressed my back flat against the heavy oak door of the office, holding my breath until my lungs physically burned. The brass doorknob directly behind my spine rattled aggressively, the metal mechanism clicking as someone forcefully tried to turn it. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, echoing in my ears like a heavy drum. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying the internal lock would hold and that they would simply assume Miles had secured it earlier in the day. The violent rattling stopped, followed immediately by an irritated, dramatic huff. It was Monica. I recognized that breathy, entitled sigh anywhere. I did not waste another fraction of a second. As soon as I heard her expensive heels click away from the office door, I pushed myself off the wood and darted across the dark hallway. I slipped directly into the lavish guest bathroom, located just a few feet away, pulling the heavy door shut and sliding the deadbolt into place with a soft, satisfying click. I leaned over the pristine marble sink, gasping for air, my entire body shaking uncontrollably from the massive adrenaline spike. I had actually made it. Before I could even turn on the faucet to complete my alibi, a sharp, rapid knocking hammered against the bathroom door, making me jump out of my skin. "Hannah, are you in there?" Monica called out, her voice dripping with venomous impatience and suspicion. I clutched my heavy leather purse tight against my chest, feeling the solid outline of the flash drive through the material. "Yes," I answered, forcing my voice to sound appropriately flustered and anxious. "I am just trying to get this horrible wine stain out of my dress. It is really soaking deep into the fabric." "Well, hurry it up!" Monica snapped through the thick wood, not bothering to hide her absolute disdain. "You are taking forever, and it is incredibly rude to abandon your own apology dinner. Besides, the private chef just left for the evening and the kitchen is an absolute disaster zone. Since you are going to be my new warehouse janitor starting next week, you might as well get some decent practice in tonight. Come downstairs immediately and start scrubbing the pots. Do not make me come back up here to get you like a disobedient child." Her footsteps clicked sharply down the hallway, fading slowly as she descended the main staircase to rejoin the men in the dining room. I stood completely frozen in the opulent bathroom, staring at my reflection in the massive gold-framed mirror. My chest was heaving, but a slow, victorious smile spread across my face. She wanted me to scrub her dirty pots. She wanted me to mop her concrete warehouse floors for minimum wage. She was standing right outside this door, openly mocking my supposed financial ruin, completely unaware that the very instrument of her total destruction was currently sitting inside my purse. I reached into the bag and pulled out the encrypted flash drive, turning the small metal rectangle over in my palm. It felt incredibly heavy. As a forensic accountant, I knew exactly what this tiny piece of technology represented. It was loaded with 200 gigabytes of federal crimes, including blatant tax evasion, forged signatures on trust fund disbursements, and offshore wire transfers to phantom shell companies. This drive held the absolute power to strip away her sprawling mansion, her rare designer clothes, her fraudulent organic business, and her freedom. I turned on the brass faucet, letting the warm water run over my trembling fingers. I splashed a generous amount of water directly onto the wine stain on my dress, vigorously rubbing the beige fabric to make it look like I had been desperately trying to scrub it clean. I needed my alibi to look perfectly convincing. Monica and Miles were incredibly arrogant, but they were not stupid when it came to self-preservation. If they suspected for one single moment that I had breached their secure local network, they would instantly destroy the servers and empty those offshore accounts before I could ever get the raw evidence to the federal authorities. I had to maintain the flawless illusion of the broken, defeated sister until the trap was perfectly set. I grabbed a thick Egyptian cotton guest towel and patted my dress dry, leaving a damp reddish blotch right in the center of the fabric. It looked entirely pathetic, which was exactly the aesthetic I needed to sell my performance. I placed the flash drive securely back inside the hidden zippered pocket of my purse. I took 3 deep breaths, deliberately slowing my racing heart rate down to a calm, steady rhythm. I adjusted my posture, letting my shoulders slump forward, instantly erasing any trace of confidence or victory from my physical stance. I unlocked the bathroom door and walked quietly down the hallway. As I descended the grand staircase, I could hear the faint sounds of my family laughing in the dining room. I headed straight toward the kitchen, exactly as Monica had ordered, ready to play my part perfectly. I spent the next 2 hours scrubbing expensive copper pots and wiping down marble countertops in Monica's massive kitchen. I let the harsh dish soap ruin my manicure, playing the broken subservient sister to absolute perfection. When I finally emerged, my mother gave me an approving nod. Monica did not even bother to look up from her phone, simply waving her hand to dismiss me for the night. Kendrick and I said our quiet goodbyes and quickly walked out to our parked car. As soon as we safely cleared the heavy security gates of their wealthy neighborhood, I let out a trembling breath. I reached into my purse, pulled out the small metal flash drive, and held it up. "We have it," I whispered. Kendrick gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Let us go tear their completely fake world apart," he replied. We got back to our house just past midnight. Zoe was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that her mother was about to start a war. I walked straight into my home office, locked the door, and booted up my primary forensic workstation. I inserted the flash drive and began the decryption process. Miles had used a standard AES encryption, which might keep out a casual snooper, but against specialized forensic software, it fell apart in less than 20 minutes. The progress bar hit 100%, and the massive directory of his hidden life suddenly populated my screen. I opened the main folder and immediately noticed a subfolder labeled with the name Riley's Glow. My curiosity spiked. Monica had just proudly announced her luxury organic children's skincare line at dinner. I clicked on the folder, expecting to find overinflated marketing budgets or ridiculously expensive packaging invoices. Instead, I found a deeply complex web of international import documents and private laboratory analyses. I opened the primary manufacturing contract. Monica was not sourcing her ingredients from pristine certified organic farms in California or Europe like she boldly claimed. The manufacturer was an unverified shell chemical plant, operating out of an unregulated industrial zone overseas. I pulled up the commercial invoices and cross-referenced them with the shipping manifests. She was paying literal pennies per gallon for massive vats of synthetic, heavily processed lotion base. But the true horror began when I opened a PDF labeled Internal Chemical Breakdown. It was a private lab test Miles had commissioned to see exactly what they were importing before they slapped their minimalist gold and white premium labels on the bottles. I scanned the list of active ingredients, my forensic training allowing me to easily decipher the complex chemical compounds. There was absolutely nothing organic or vegan about this product. The formulas were packed with cheap, highly toxic synthetic fillers, artificial fragrances, and dangerous preservatives designed to artificially extend the shelf life of the cheap lotion. Then my eyes locked onto a specific chemical compound near the bottom of the analytical report. Sodium hydroxide mixed heavily with calcium thioglycolate and a potent formaldehyde-releasing agent. My blood ran completely cold. The air caught in my throat. I pushed my rolling chair back from the desk, my hands flying up to cover my mouth. I had just spent the entire weekend reading medical reports and researching the exact caustic chemicals that had melted my 8-year-old daughter's hair and scarred her scalp. I knew those compound names by heart. They were the exact same illegal industrial-strength relaxer chemicals. Monica was not just using cheap ingredients. The overseas factory was cross-contaminating her children's skincare line with highly toxic, unregulated hair straighteners and bleaching agents. The product she was about to market as a gentle, organic daily lotion for toddlers and children was essentially a diluted vat of corrosive acid. The horrific realization washed over me in a violent wave. What happened to Zoe at the house was not an isolated incident with an adult hair product. Monica had actively used Zoe as a test subject. She had applied an early prototype of her toxic chemically tainted Riley's Glow product directly onto my daughter's scalp to see if the straighteners in the formula would loosen her natural curls. When the potent, unregulated chemicals instantly burned Zoe's skin and melted her hair, Monica panicked, chopped off the damaged coils, and lied to cover her tracks. She was planning to launch this exact toxic formula to thousands of unsuspecting mothers across the country next weekend. She was going to put this poison on babies. My hands began to shake with a pure, unadulterated rage I had never felt before in my entire life. I slowly reached forward for my wireless computer mouse, my vision narrowing to a deadly focus. I had just found the first nail in her coffin. Now it was time to find the heavy hammer. I minimized the chemical analysis report and opened the master financial ledger. Finding the toxic ingredients was enough to destroy her brand and possibly trigger a consumer protection investigation, but I needed the ironclad proof that would send my brother to federal prison. As a forensic accountant, I knew that white-collar criminals always slipped up in the routing numbers. They get arrogant. They assume the sheer volume of transactions will hide the most damning evidence. I opened a fresh spreadsheet and began cross-referencing the wire transfers from the Phantom Delaware shell companies with the initial capital investments injected into Riley's Glow. It took me less than 30 minutes to perfectly find the massive, glaring financial hole hidden deeply in his otherwise very careful accounting. Monica had used exactly $2 million to secure the overseas manufacturing contract, lease the warehouse, and hire the elite public relations firm for her upcoming launch party. I tracked every penny of that $2 million backward. The money flowed directly out of Monica's corporate account, back through David Rollins's fake management companies, and straight into the central accounts of my grandfather's trust. But the ultimate betrayal was not just the embezzlement itself, it was the specific origin of the stolen funds. I opened the trust's internal allocation folders. My grandfather had explicitly divided his assets into 3 distinct sub-accounts. One for my parents, one for Miles, and one specifically designated for me. Miles was legally required to manage the overall investments, but he had no authority to withdraw the principal balance from my designated account without my direct notarized signature. I clicked open a folder labeled Hannah Authorizations. My breath caught in my throat. The folder contained dozens of high-resolution scanned PDF documents. They were formal withdrawal requests, completely liquidating my commercial real estate dividends and transferring my cash reserves directly into the main operating fund. And at the bottom of every single page was my personal signature, except I had never signed them. I zoomed in on the ink strokes. It was a remarkably good forgery, but under the harsh, trained scrutiny of a professional audit, the fraudulent patterns were obvious. Miles had traced my signature from an old college loan document and stamped it onto the release forms. He had systematically drained my entire designated inheritance. The $2 million that Monica used to build her fake organic empire was entirely mine. The $200,000 worth of Birkin bags I had destroyed with bleach were bought with my stolen money. The imported truffles they served at dinner, the designer clothes Monica strutted around in the sprawling mansion where I was treated like the family peasant. It was all funded by stealing my financial future. My brother had looked me dead in the eye at dinner, allowed his arrogant wife to offer me a minimum-wage janitorial job, and threatened to ruin my husband's career, all while standing on top of my stolen wealth. They had deliberately kept me financially suppressed for years. They knew that if I ever gained access to my true inheritance, I would immediately hire independent auditors to review the family trust. Their entire illusion of extreme wealth and unearned superiority relied completely on keeping me poor, isolated, and dependent on their toxic charity. I sat alone in the quiet darkness of my office, the soft hum of the computer tower the only sound in the room. The sheer scale of their sociopathy was almost impossible to process. They had chemically burned my 8-year-old daughter's scalp out of pure vanity and systematically stolen my life savings out of pure greed. I felt a cold, absolute detachment wash over my mind. The pain of the family betrayal vanished, replaced entirely by a dangerous surgical focus. I meticulously highlighted every forged document, every routed offshore wire transfer, and every fake invoice. I dragged them all into a secure encrypted folder on my desktop. I had just assembled the complete financial anatomy of a massive federal felony: wire fraud, tax evasion, identity theft, and grand larceny. The minimum mandatory sentence for this level of financial crime was at least 10 years in federal prison. I ejected the flash drive and locked it inside my fireproof safe. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the large window overlooking our quiet street. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale, cold light over the neighborhood. Friday morning had arrived. Target was going to make their official announcement soon, and Monica was going to start heavily promoting her launch party. Let her enjoy her final weekend of pretending to be a wealthy, successful entrepreneur. I had the heavy hammer. Now I just needed to build the perfect public stage to swing it. The pale morning light slowly filled my office, signaling the start of a day that would test every ounce of my self-control. I had barely slept, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and black coffee, when my phone vibrated loudly against the mahogany desk. It was 8 in the morning. The caller ID flashed Claire's name. I answered immediately, hoping for a rare piece of good news, but the heavy silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know before she even spoke. "Hannah, I am so incredibly sorry," Claire whispered, her voice tight with genuine regret. "The executives at Target called me 15 minutes ago. The rumors about the active Child Protective Services investigation reached their legal department. They have a zero-tolerance morality and controversy clause for all their child models. They are officially pulling Zoe from the national campaign. They are going with a backup model." I closed my eyes, absorbing the crushing blow. It was not about the money from the commercial, and it was certainly not about the fame. It was about the massive, radiant smile on Zoe's face when she first found out her natural coils were considered beautiful enough to be on billboards across the country. Monica had systematically destroyed that joy. I thanked Claire for trying her best and ended the call. I walked heavily down the hallway toward Zoe's bedroom, dreading the conversation I was about to have. The door to her connected bathroom was cracked open. I stepped inside and found my 8-year-old daughter standing on her blue plastic step stool, staring directly into the vanity mirror. She had taken off her soft medical cap. She was looking at the jagged, uneven patches of her hacked hair and the red, angry burn marks blistering along her scalp. Thick, silent tears were streaming down her small cheeks, dropping onto the collar of her pajamas. "I look like a monster, Mommy," she choked out, her voice breaking into a gut-wrenching sob. "Aunt Monica was right. My hair is bad. I just want to look like Riley." My heart shattered into a million jagged pieces, but I refused to let her see me cry. I stepped up to the sink, wrapped my arms tightly around her small waist, and buried my face against her uninjured shoulder. I turned her around so she was forced to look directly into my eyes. "You listen to me right now, Zoe," I said, keeping my voice incredibly firm and steady. "You are the most beautiful girl in the world. Your hair is a crown, and your skin is absolute magic. What Aunt Monica did to you was an act of pure evil jealousy because she knows exactly how bright you shine. I need you to be strong for just a little while longer, okay? I promise you with everything in my soul, we are not hiding anymore. We are going to war and we are going to win." Zoe sniffled, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, and gave me a small, brave nod. I kissed her forehead, tucked her back into bed with her favorite books, and marched straight back to my home office. The sadness was completely gone. Only the executioner remained. I sat down at my workstation and cracked my knuckles. It was time to build the ultimate weapon. As a forensic accountant, I knew that raw data was useless if the audience could not understand the narrative. I needed to construct an airtight, undeniable digital dossier that would leave absolutely zero room for legal spin or public relations damage control. I created a master directory on my encrypted drive. In the first folder, I compiled the exact timeline of the financial embezzlement. I highlighted the forged signatures on the trust withdrawal forms, pairing them side by side with the wire transfers routing my $2 million into Monica's corporate startup accounts. I mapped out the entire money laundering network using clean color-coded flowcharts that connected Miles to David Rollins and the Delaware shell companies. In the second folder, I built the chemical exposure profile. I uploaded the private laboratory analysis of Riley's glow, drawing bright red circles around the toxic compounds of sodium hydroxide and formaldehyde. I attached federal FDA cosmetic regulations, proving the formula was highly illegal. Then I added the final devastating piece of the puzzle. I scanned Dr. Evans's pediatric emergency room report explicitly detailing the chemical burns on Zoe's scalp caused by those exact same corrosive ingredients. I worked for 6 straight hours without taking a single break. I merged the financial fraud and the chemical child endangerment into one sleek, devastating presentation file. It was a masterpiece of corporate destruction. Every claim was backed by federal tax documents, banking routing numbers, and certified medical records. There was no escape hatch. By 2 in the afternoon, the dossier was completely finalized. The trap was fully loaded. Now I just needed to start setting the timers. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The house was entirely silent, save for the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I thought I had earned at least a few moments of peace to strategize my next move, but my phone suddenly erupted. It vibrated violently against the wood of my desk, buzzing with dozens of rapid-fire notifications. Kendrick pushed open the door to my office, his face dark with absolute anger. He held his phone out toward me, the screen displaying the Instagram application. He did not say a word, he just tapped the play button and increased the volume. Monica's face filled the bright screen. She was sitting on the floor of her massive custom closet, surrounded by her remaining designer clothes. She was wearing absolutely no makeup, her hair pulled back into a messy bun to make her look as small and fragile as possible. She was performing a masterclass in manipulation. She took a deep, shuddering breath, staring directly into the camera lens with perfectly timed tears welling in her eyes. "Hey guys," she began, her voice trembling beautifully. "I usually like to keep my platform positive and focused on light, but my family is going through an absolute nightmare right now, and I have to speak my truth before the rumors get completely out of control." She wiped a single delicate tear from her cheek. "As many of you know, I am launching Riley's Glow next weekend. I have poured my entire heart and soul into creating this organic line for your children. But recently, a deeply unstable, jealous family member has been trying to extort me and my husband. This person actually broke into my home and violently attacked me with toxic chemicals, completely destroying my property. She is now making up horrific lies about me trying to ruin my reputation right before the biggest launch of my life because she wants a massive financial payout. Please send prayers for my family's physical safety." I stared at the screen in absolute disbelief. She had 500,000 followers, a massive army of devoted fans who worshipped her perfect aesthetic lifestyle. She had just weaponized every single one of them against me. I scrolled down into the comments section. It was an absolute bloodbath. Thousands of comments were pouring in every single minute. Her followers were rabid, demanding to know the identity of the sister-in-law. They called me a psychotic monster, a jealous loser, and a gold digger. Some of her local followers had already started piecing the clues together, dropping vague hints about Kendrick's sudden suspension from the school district. They were actively trying to completely destroy my life based on a sociopathic lie. My own phone buzzed again, interrupting the horrific feed. A text message banner flashed across the top of my screen. It was from my mother. I opened the message thread, my heart turning to absolute stone as I read her words. "Your father and I just saw Monica's brave video. We are absolutely disgusted by you, Hannah. You could not just swallow your bitter pride and be happy for her incredible success. You had to push her to the point where she felt unsafe in her own home. Do not ever contact us again. You are entirely dead to this family. You are completely on your own now." I read the brutal message twice. This was the woman who gave birth to me, casually throwing me away to protect the wealthy daughter-in-law who had literally burned her own grandchild. A few days ago, A text message like that would have completely shattered my world. I would have spent hours crying, agonizing over what I did wrong, desperately trying to figure out how to win back their toxic love. But standing in my dark office, looking at the meticulous digital dossier of federal crimes I had just compiled, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, surgical calm. I did not reply to my mother. I did not type out an angry defensive comment on Instagram. I simply pressed the power button on the side of my phone, shutting the screen off completely. I tossed the dead device into the bottom drawer of my desk and pushed it shut. They wanted to cast me out. They wanted me to be the villain in their pathetic fake reality television show. I was more than happy to play the role of the monster if it meant burning their entire kingdom to ash. I turned my attention back to my glowing computer monitors. The crying video had actually done me a massive favor. It confirmed that Monica was entirely focused on her public image and her launch party. She was completely blind to the real danger circling her. I cracked my knuckles and opened my encrypted email client. It was time to start distributing the poison. I opened a heavily encrypted virtual private network, routing my connection through 5 different international servers to ensure my digital footprint was invisible. I was about to contact some of the most powerful people and federal agencies in the country, and I could not afford a single careless mistake. The master dossier I had built was safely uploaded to a secure dark web hosting site. Accessing the files required a highly specific decryption key, which I embedded directly into a custom-generated QR code. But the files would not open immediately. I programmed a hard-coded digital timer into the link. The data was locked behind a countdown clock set to expire at exactly 8 o'clock on Saturday night, the precise moment Monica was scheduled to take the stage at her launch party. My first targets were the financial lifelines of Monica's entire operation. Through my deep dive into Miles's ledgers, I had identified the 3 primary venture capital firms that had invested heavily in Riley's glow. These were elite, reputation-obsessed investors who threw millions of dollars at aesthetic brands and demanded absolute perfection in return. I drafted an anonymous email to the senior partners at all 3 firms. The subject line was incredibly simple, but devastatingly effective. It read, "Fraudulent supply chain and pending indictment for Riley's glow." I did not attach the full dossier. I only attached the QR code along with a short, highly professional message warning them that their massive capital investment had been acquired through grand larceny and was currently funding the production of unregulated toxic chemicals. I advised them to scan the code and wait for the timer to hit 0 if they wanted to pull their funding before the federal raid hit the press. I hit send, watching the encrypted packets vanish into the digital ether. Next, I turned my attention to the regulatory authorities. I navigated to the official reporting portal for the Food and Drug Administration's Cosmetic Safety Division. I created a burner email address and drafted an urgent priority report regarding a severe public health threat. I attached a single low-resolution screenshot of the overseas laboratory analysis, clearly highlighting the fatal mixture of sodium hydroxide and formaldehyde-releasing agents. In the body of the message, I explained that an unverified manufacturer was preparing to distribute thousands of units of this caustic acid marketed under the guise of an organic daily lotion for infants and toddlers. I explicitly stated that the formula had already caused second-degree chemical burns on an 8-year-old child. At the very bottom of the urgent report, I pasted the identical QR code. I added a single line of text informing the agency that the complete supply chain manifests the warehouse addresses, and the unredacted medical records would be entirely accessible the moment the clock struck 8 on Saturday evening. The final package was the most dangerous and the most satisfying to deliver. I opened a direct encrypted communication channel to the local field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically targeting the white-collar crime division. This required a completely different approach. Federal agents ignore vague threats, so I had to give them just enough hard data to instantly trigger a mandatory preliminary investigation. I attached one forged trust fund withdrawal signature and one offshore routing number tied to the phantom Delaware shell companies. The subject line read Massive Embezzlement and Wire Fraud Network, orchestrated by Miles. I kept the message incredibly brief, speaking directly to their forensic accounting teams, in a language they would immediately respect. I stated that a $2 million domestic money laundering operation had been uncovered. I provided the exact QR code and promised that the full 200-gigabyte master ledger, complete with every single forged document and fake invoice, would decrypt automatically on Saturday night. I pressed the final send button and leaned back in my leather chair. The heavy, exhaustive work was officially done. The digital dominoes were lined up waiting in the dark for gravity to take over. I looked down at the small digital clock on my desktop monitor. It was Friday afternoon. The massive QR code timer I had just distributed to the most powerful people in the city was currently ticking down second by agonizing second. Monica and Miles were likely spending this moment popping champagne, finalizing the guest list for their lavish party, and celebrating what they thought was my humiliating defeat. They thought they had ruined my life and secured their fake empire forever. They had no idea that invisible crosshairs were now resting squarely on their chests. I turned off my computer monitors, the screens fading to a deep black. All I had to do now was dress for the occasion and watch the absolute destruction unfold. Saturday morning finally arrived. The tension in our house was sharp and undeniable, but it was no longer fueled by fear. It was fueled by absolute, calculated purpose. At 9 o'clock, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed the main switchboard for the state's Child Protective Services Division. I answered immediately. It was Agent Collins. Her typically icy bureaucratic tone was completely gone, replaced by a cautious, almost stunned professionalism. Hannah, she began, clearing her throat. The director and I just finished reviewing the encrypted preview file you submitted late last night. We have cross-referenced the pediatric emergency room report with the initial chemical breakdown you provided of the suspect's cosmetic product. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my heart beating with slow, steady confidence. I had sent CPS just enough of the chemical dossier to prove Monica's horrific guilt without revealing the massive federal financial trap waiting to spring later that night. And I prompted her, keeping my voice perfectly calm. The preliminary findings are deeply disturbing, Agent Collins admitted. Given the extreme severity of the child endangerment evidence against your sister-in-law, we are immediately dropping the abuse investigation against you and your husband. I have already contacted the superintendent of your husband's school district. His administrative suspension has been fully lifted, and he is cleared to return to work on Monday morning. Furthermore, we are opening an active priority criminal investigation into Monica and the distribution of this chemical product. I let out a breath I did not even realize I had been holding. Kendrick, who was standing right next to me, squeezed my shoulder tightly, a massive weight finally lifting from his shoulders. "Thank you, Agent Collins," I said smoothly. "But I would highly advise your agents to hold off on visiting Monica's residence until exactly 8 o'clock tonight. Trust me, you are going to want to be at her launch party." I hung up the phone and looked at my husband. "We are entirely clear," I told him, a fierce smile breaking across my face. The dark cloud hovering over our family was completely gone. Now it was time to prepare for the final execution. I had promised Zoe that we were not hiding anymore, and I meant every single word of it. I hired an incredibly talented private natural hairstylist named Maya to come to the house. Maya specialized in severe hair trauma and restorative styling. We set up a chair for Zoe in the living room, and Maya spent 4 painstaking hours working absolute magic. She used ultra-soft premium extensions to gently weave Zoe's damaged coils into a breathtaking, majestic braided crown. The intricate, towering style completely covered every single chemical burn and jagged cut, while proudly celebrating the absolute beauty of her natural African texture. When Zoe finally looked in the mirror, she did not cry. She stood up a little taller, looking like absolute royalty. With Zoe looking radiant, it was time for Kendrick and me to suit up for the war Monica had started. Kendrick put on a tailored charcoal gray three-piece suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He looked incredibly sharp, powerful, and ready to protect his family at all costs. I walked into our bedroom and opened the heavy garment bag hanging on the back of my closet door. I had purchased this dress months ago, with a massive bonus I earned after successfully tearing apart a fraudulent hedge fund for a corporate client. I had never worn it because my mother always told me that bold colors were too aggressive and made me look angry. Tonight I was going to be the most aggressive thing they had ever seen. I slipped into the floor-length blood-red designer gown. The heavy silk material hugged every single curve of my body, perfectly dropping into a dramatic sweep train. The deep, vibrant crimson color was a direct, intentional challenge to the minimalist gold and white aesthetic Monica demanded for her precious launch party. It was the color of absolute warning. I paired the gown with sleek gold stilettos and kept my makeup razor sharp. I pinned my own thick, dark hair up into an elegant, commanding updo. When I finally walked out into the living room, Kendrick let out a low, appreciative whistle, his eyes wide with admiration. "You look incredibly dangerous," he said, kissing my cheek. "That is exactly the point," I replied smoothly. "We are going to walk straight into her perfect fake world and burn it entirely to the ground in front of everyone she desperately wants to impress." We grabbed our coats and walked out the front door together. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows across the driveway. The digital countdown timers attached to my anonymous federal emails were entering their final hours. We got into the car and Kendrick started the engine. The drive to the exclusive downtown event hall felt entirely different than the drive to their house just a few days ago. I was no longer the broken defensive scapegoat trying to survive my toxic family. I was the architect of their total destruction, and I was arriving right on schedule. We pulled up to the Grand Atrium, a massive modern event space in the wealthiest district of downtown. Monica had clearly spared absolutely no expense for her brand launch. A long line of luxury vehicles waited patiently at the valet stand, and a pristine white carpet replaced the traditional red one, perfectly matching her minimalist brand aesthetic. Massive gold letters spelling out Riley's Glow were projected onto the sleek glass exterior of the building. Photographers crowded the entrance, snapping pictures of local socialites, wealthy investors, and influential beauty bloggers as they walked inside. Kendrick handed the keys to a stunned valet driver. He walked around to open my door, offering his hand. I stepped out into the cool evening air, the heavy silk of my blood-red gown sweeping elegantly against the concrete. Zoe stepped out of the back seat, next her chin held high, the intricate braided crown sitting beautifully on her head. We linked arms and walked toward the entrance. The moment we stepped through the heavy glass doors, the atmosphere visibly shifted. The venue was decorated entirely in stark white and pale gold. Thousands of white roses cascaded down from the ceiling, and every single guest had adhered strictly to Monica's neutral color palette dress code. My vibrant blood-red dress instantly cut through the room like a violent slash of color on a blank canvas. Conversations began to fade almost immediately. The upbeat lounge music playing softly through the hidden speakers suddenly felt entirely inadequate to cover the heavy, awkward silence spreading across the massive room. Influencers and press members lowered their champagne flutes, turning their heads to stare at us. Several of them whispered behind manicured hands, clearly recognizing me from Monica's crying video. They expected a frantic, unhinged, jealous woman trying to cause a messy scene. Instead, they saw a completely unified, powerful family, walking with absolute, untouchable confidence. It took less than 30 seconds for my parents to spot me through the crowd. They were standing near the open bar holding court with a group of older investors. The color instantly drained from my mother's face. She slammed her crystal glass down onto the marble counter, spilling expensive champagne everywhere, and began marching directly toward me. My father was right behind her, his face flushed with immediate anger. They moved quickly, trying to intercept us before we could get any closer to the massive stage, set up at the far end of the room. My mother grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging sharply into my skin. What in the world do you think you are doing? She hissed, keeping her voice low to avoid drawing more attention from the press. I explicitly told you that you were dead to this family. You have a lot of nerve showing your face here tonight after everything you have done to Monica. I looked down at her hand gripping my arm, then directly into her eyes. My expression was completely devoid of emotion. Let go of me right now. I said, my voice quiet but carrying an undeniable lethal weight. My mother flinched at the coldness in my tone and slowly pulled her hand away. My father stepped forward, puffing out his chest, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. You need to leave this building right now, Hannah, he demanded, pointing a rigid finger toward the exit. This is Monica's night. She has worked too hard to let your bitter jealousy ruin this launch. If you do not turn around and walk out those doors this second, I will have the security team drag you out in front of all these cameras and reporters. I did not break eye contact with him. I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not explain myself or try to seek his approval. I smiled a small, chilling upward curve of my lips. You are standing on the wrong side of history tonight, Dad, I whispered smoothly. I highly suggest you step out of my way before you get caught in the blast radius. He opened his mouth to reply, completely taken aback by my absolute lack of fear, but I did not give him the chance to speak. Kendrick gently placed his hand on the small of my back, guiding me forward. We walked right past my stunned parents, completely ignoring their outraged gasps. The crowd naturally parted for us, clearing a direct path down the center of the room. My eyes locked onto the main stage where Miles was nervously talking to the production crew, completely unaware that his timer had just run out. Monica was standing right next to him, holding a microphone and adjusting her custom emerald jewelry. They were completely surrounded by their fake success, entirely blind to the federal storm that was about to hit them. Miles noticed the sudden shift in the room. He looked up from his clipboard, scanning the parted crowd, until his eyes locked directly onto my vibrant red dress. The confident smile he had been wearing all evening instantly melted off his face, replaced by a flash of pure panic. He dropped his clipboard onto the stage, frantically gesturing toward the perimeter. Security, he yelled, his voice cracking over the lounge music. Get security here right now. Monica spun around, her eyes widening in absolute horror when she saw me walking calmly down the aisle with my family. She gripped her microphone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Within seconds, 4 massive men wearing black suits materialized from the shadows. They moved with aggressive precision, forming a solid human wall between us and the stage. The head of security, a tall man with a stern expression, stepped directly into my path, holding his hand up like a stop sign. Ma'am, you need to turn around and vacate the premises immediately. He ordered, his voice completely devoid of patience. You are not on the approved guest list for this private event. I did not stop walking until I was less than 2 feet away from his chest. I am not leaving, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. The security chief's jaw clenched. He was used to dealing with paparazzi or intoxicated party crashers, not a woman in a designer gown, staring a hole straight through him. He nodded to the other 3 guards. Remove them, he commanded sharply. One of the guards stepped forward and aggressively grabbed Kendrick's upper arm, attempting to twist him toward the exit. Kendrick did not even flinch. He planted his feet firmly into the white carpet, his muscles tensing under his tailored suit. Let go of my arm right now, Kendrick warned, his voice a dangerous rumble that sent a clear message. The guard hesitated, realizing he was trying to move a man fully prepared to defend his family. The entire room held its breath. The influencers stopped whispering. The photographers lowered their expensive cameras, the silence stretching tight. Miles stood on the edge of the stage, a smug smirk returning to his face as he watched the guards prepare to physically throw us out into the street. He thought he had the absolute upper hand. Before the situation escalated into a brawl, I calmly reached into my red designer clutch. I did not pull out a phone. I pulled out a single neatly folded piece of thick ivory paper, stamped with a raised gold notary seal. I held the document out, pressing it directly against the chest of the head of security. Read it, I instructed him. my tone shifting from polite to absolute unquestionable authority. The massive man frowned, looking down at the paper. He slowly released his defensive stance and took the document, scanning the heavily formatted legal text. His eyes darted across the page, tracking the bold print and the official county property registration numbers. The smug expression on Miles's face began to falter as he watched the interaction from the stage. He had expected me to scream, to cry, or to throw a fit. He did not expect me to serve legal paperwork. "What is this?" the security chief asked, his tough demeanor cracking as he realized he was holding a certified commercial property deed. "That is the official county deed for the grand atrium," I said, projecting my voice so it carried clearly across the silent room. "This entire building is a commercial asset owned entirely by my family's private trust fund, and as a legally recognized co-beneficiary of that exact trust, I am a partial owner of the very floor you are standing on. You were hired by my brother to guard the door, but you are currently operating inside my property." The security chief swallowed hard, his eyes darting to my face. I took a step forward. "If your men lay another finger on my husband or my daughter, I will personally sue your private security firm into absolute bankruptcy for assault and battery on the legal owner of the venue." The security chief looked back down at the gold seal, then up at Miles, who was visibly sweating. The chief made a rapid, calculated decision. He folded the paper, handed it back to me, and tapped his earpiece. "Stand down," he ordered his men. "Let them through." The guards immediately dropped their hands and stepped completely out of our way. The invisible wall shattered. Miles stumbled backward, his mouth hanging open in absolute shock, entirely stripped of his power. I slipped the deed back into my clutch, took Kendrick's arm, and continued my march directly toward the stage. We reached the front row just as the overhead lights dimmed to a dramatic low. A bright spotlight snapped onto the center of the main stage. Monica, visibly flustered but unwilling to let me ruin her moment of glory, plastered a massive practice smile onto her face. She stepped confidently into the spotlight. The crowd, sensing the heavy tension, offered a polite round of applause. "Thank you all so incredibly much for being here tonight," Monica began, her voice echoing through the massive room via the pristine sound system. "Tonight is not just about launching a brand. It is about a revolution in how we care for the most precious things in our lives, our children." She gestured elegantly to a glass pedestal beside her. Resting perfectly in the center was a single bottle of Riley's Glow, illuminated by its own miniature spotlight. The packaging was immaculate, exactly as she promised. White and gold, exuding pure, clean luxury. She picked up the bottle and held it out toward the audience like a holy artifact. "For too long, mothers have been forced to rely on harsh synthetic products," Monica continued, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. "I wanted something completely pure. Something derived entirely from the earth, completely organic, and entirely safe for the sensitive skin of our little ones. True natural beauty starts with absolute transparency and honesty." I stood in the front row, holding Kendrick's hand, staring up at her. The sheer hypocrisy of her words made my blood run completely cold. She was standing there preaching about natural beauty and child safety, while my daughter stood beside me with a permanently scarred scalp from the exact poison she was holding in her manicured hand. I checked my watch. It was 7:59 and 50 seconds. I did not interrupt her. I simply waited. 10 seconds left. Monica took a deep breath, preparing to introduce her elite group of venture capitalist investors. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Exactly at 8 o'clock, the massive LED screens dominating the entire back wall of the stage suddenly flickered. The soft, elegant white and gold Riley's Glow logo aggressively glitched, tearing into jagged horizontal lines of digital static. A low electronic hum buzzed through the venue's massive speakers, entirely cutting off the soft lounge music that had been playing underneath Monica's speech. The audience gasped in unison. Monica froze, her perfect smile faltering as she instinctively turned around to look at the screen. The static vanished instantly, replaced by a massive, glaringly bright display of my meticulously color-coded forensic accounting spreadsheets. The screen was 50 feet wide, projecting high-resolution scans of forged trust fund withdrawal signatures, offshore banking routing numbers, and deeply complex money laundering flowcharts. At the very top of the display, typed in massive, undeniable red letters, was the heading Federal Evidence Master File Embezzlement and Wire Fraud. A collective wave of shocked whispers crashed through the room. The influential beauty bloggers lowered their phones, their live streams capturing the horrific financial reality now glowing intensely behind their favorite aesthetic influencer. The venture capitalists in the VYP section stood up from their velvet chairs, their faces draining of all color as they recognized their own corporate investment accounts linked directly to phantom shell companies on the screen. Monica's eyes darted frantically across the massive spreadsheets. "What is this?" she hissed into her microphone, the sound amplified across the entire venue. "Turn it off. Somebody turn the screens off right now." She looked toward the production booth, waving her arms frantically, but the production crew had absolutely no control. My encrypted program had locked them entirely out of the local network. The timers attached to my anonymous federal emails had just hit 0, and the truth was now a permanent fixture in the room. I released Kendrick's hand and walked toward the short staircase leading up to the stage. Miles tried to lunge forward to block my path, but he was physically paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the evidence currently displayed above his head. He knew exactly what those spreadsheets meant. His entire life was officially over. I walked up the steps, the heavy silk of my red gown trailing behind me like a warning flag. Monica saw me approaching and panicked. She took a step back, raising her microphone to scream for security again. I did not give her the chance. I walked directly up to her, moving with the cold, calculated precision of an absolute professional. I reached down to the base of her wireless microphone pack and violently yanked the power cable completely out of its socket. Her frantic, screaming voice was instantly cut off from the venue speakers. I snatched the dead microphone from her trembling hand and confidently took the center stage. I pulled my own wireless microphone from the small pocket hidden in the folds of my gown. I had synced it to the hijacked audio system before Kendrick and I even walked into the building. I flipped the power switch, and the green indicator light illuminated. "Can everybody hear me clearly?" I asked, my voice booming perfectly through the venue's massive surround sound speakers. The room was dead silent, the crowd staring up at me in absolute shock. I did not wait for an answer. Before we get into the complex details of these fascinating accounting spreadsheets glowing behind me, I want to play a brief audio clip for our esteemed venture capitalists sitting in the front row, I announced. I pressed a button on my digital remote clicker. The electronic hum faded, replaced immediately by the crisp, undeniable sound of a recorded telephone conversation. It was Miles's voice, captured perfectly on an encrypted digital voicemail he had foolishly saved to his own local hard drive. "David, why need you to expedite the transfer from the Apex Holdings account?" Miles's recorded voice echoed off the high ceilings for everyone to hear. "Just forge Hannah's signature on the K1 release form exactly like we did last time. She never checks the trust disbursements anyway. Move the remaining $2 million into Monica's corporate startup account by Friday, or we cannot secure the warehouse lease." The audio clip ended, leaving a devastating, suffocating silence in its wake. I looked directly down at the VIP section where the 3 senior partners from the venture capital firms were sitting. Their faces had turned the color of ash. They were elite financial experts, and they instantly understood the catastrophic legal implications of what they had just heard. They had heavily invested their clients' clean money into a company built entirely on stolen, laundered federal funds. I turned my attention to the press and the influencers, using my free hand to gesture gracefully toward the massive 50-foot screen behind me. "What you are looking at is the absolute truth behind Riley's glow," I explained, pacing slowly across the stage with absolute authority. "My name is Hannah, and I am a certified forensic accountant. I am also the sister of the man currently sweating near the staircase. For the last 3 years, my brother Miles has been managing our grandfather's private family trust. But instead of managing it, he has been systematically bleeding it dry to fund his luxury lifestyle." I clicked to the next slide. A massive high-resolution image of the K1 tax forms appeared completely unredacted for the world to see. I walked the audience step by step through the exact mechanics of the fraud. I pointed to the gross revenue lines showing exactly how millions of dollars were illegally funneled out of the trust before the profits were properly distributed. I highlighted the fraudulent management fees paid to phantom Delaware shell companies. I explained that these fake companies were registered to Monica's cousin, who just so happened to be the man on the other end of that damning phone call. I walked to the edge of the stage, pointing my finger directly at my brother. Miles stood completely frozen, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically toward the exits as if he could somehow outrun a permanent digital paper trail. He forged my personal signature on multiple federal withdrawal requests. I stated, my voice echoing with a cold, absolute fury. He stole $2 million of my direct inheritance. He committed grand larceny, wire fraud, and identity theft. And he took my stolen money to fund this completely fraudulent vanity project for his wife. Monica let out a high-pitched, hysterical sob, dropping to her knees on the stage. She tried to cover her face with her hands, but the camera flashes from the press pit were already blinding her. The journalists were frantically typing on their phones live, tweeting the absolute destruction of a major influencer brand in real time. The venture capitalists in the front row were whispering aggressively to their legal counsel, pulling out their phones to desperately freeze their investment accounts before the federal government could seize the tainted assets. My parents were standing frozen near the open bar, their mouths hanging open in pure horror. They were finally seeing their golden boy for exactly what he was: a pathetic, desperate criminal who had robbed his own family to maintain a fake illusion of superiority. I looked down at them, letting the heavy reality of my words crush their arrogant delusions. I had not just ruined Monica's launch party. I completely dismantled the financial foundation of their entire existence. The fake empire was crumbling exactly as I planned, brick by stolen brick. And the most beautiful part of this execution was that I had not even reached the most devastating piece of evidence yet. I clicked my remote one more time, preparing to expose the true poison hiding inside those pristine white bottles. The screen behind me shifted instantly. The complex financial spreadsheets vanished, replaced by a stark black and white document bearing the official seal of an independent chemical testing laboratory. I turned back to the audience, sweeping my gaze across the horrified faces of the beauty influencers and wealthy mothers who had eagerly lined up to support this brand. Stealing millions of dollars from a family trust is a massive federal crime, I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence like a sharpened blade. But believe it or not, the embezzlement is actually the least offensive thing my brother and his wife have done this year. What you are looking at now is the unredacted certified chemical analysis of the product you are all holding in your hands right now. I pointed my remote directly at the screen, highlighting a long column of complex scientific terms in bright neon yellow. Monica stood on this stage just 10 minutes ago and promised you a completely organic, vegan, and safe skincare line for your babies, I continued, my tone dropping into a deadly serious register. But she did not source her ingredients from pristine organic farms. She used the stolen money to lease an unverified, unregulated chemical manufacturing plant overseas. And to maximize her profit margins, she allowed them to cross-contaminate the lotion base with cheap, highly toxic industrial fillers. I began reading the highlighted ingredients aloud, making sure every single syllable echoed perfectly across the massive event space: sodium hydroxide, calcium thioglycolate, and a highly potent formaldehyde-releasing agent. For those of you who do not have a background in chemistry, I will translate. These are not organic moisturizers. These are the exact active chemical compounds found in industrial-strength adult hair relaxers and corrosive bleaching agents. This product is highly illegal, and it is absolute poison. A collective gasp ripped through the audience. Influencers who had been holding the pristine white and gold bottles of Riley's Glow up for their cameras suddenly froze. "It gets worse," I said, refusing to let them look away. Monica knew the formula was tainted. She knew it was incredibly dangerous. But her massive ego and her desperation to launch this brand completely overrode any basic human decency. She needed to test the product, but she obviously was not going to risk putting it on her own perfect daughter. I looked down at the front row where my husband Kendrick stood tall and fiercely protective, holding my 8-year-old daughter's hand. I looked at Zoe. Her beautiful braided crown sat high on her head, completely covering the terrible trauma she had endured. I gave her a small, reassuring nod. Last weekend, Monica invited my daughter over for a fun cousin spa day. I told the crowd, my voice thick with absolute disgust. She applied a prototype batch of this exact toxic formula directly to my child's scalp. She claimed she was just trying to tame her natural hair. Within minutes, the corrosive chemicals ate through the top layers of my daughter's skin. She suffered severe second-degree chemical burns. Monica panicked, used kitchen scissors to hack off my child's beautiful hair, and then filed a completely false child abuse report against me to cover up her horrific crime. The reaction in the room was instantaneous and explosive, the absolute horror registered on the faces of the attendees. A prominent mommy blogger standing near the front row let out a sharp cry of disgust and physically dropped her promotional gift bag. The heavy paper bag hit the floor, and the white bottle of Riley's Glow rolled out onto the pristine white carpet. Like a rapid chain reaction, other influencers and guests began dropping their bags. The thud of expensive promotional items hitting the floor echoed throughout the grand atrium. They were literally throwing the products away as if they were holding active grenades. People were furiously wiping their hands on their expensive dresses, terrified that the toxic lotion might have leaked onto their skin. The venture capitalists sitting in the front row immediately signaled their private security details, aggressively demanding to be escorted out of the building before the federal authorities arrived. The journalists practically shoved their recording devices closer to the stage, sensing the absolute biggest scandal of the decade. The pristine white and gold aesthetic of the evening had been completely shattered, replaced by the ugly reality of greed. "You are lying!" Monica shrieked, her voice cracking hysterically as she scrambled up from the floor. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She is lying. This is a jealous setup. My product is perfectly safe." "If it is perfectly safe, Monica?" I challenged her immediately, stepping closer to the edge of the stage. "Then open that bottle right now and rub a generous handful of it directly onto your own face. Let us see how that beautiful skin reacts to industrial formaldehyde." Monica stared at the bottle resting on the glass pedestal next to her. Her hands shook violently. She took a step back, completely unwilling to touch her own creation. Her sheer terror was the absolute final confirmation the room needed. The crowd erupted into angry shouts. The press cameras flashed aggressively, capturing the undeniable guilt written over her terrified face. Before the chaos could escalate into a physical riot, the massive double doors at the back of the grand atrium swung open with a deafening crash. The heavy wood slammed against the pristine white walls, instantly silencing the angry shouts of the crowd. A dozen men and women wearing dark tactical windbreakers over formal suits marched into the room. The bold yellow letters printed across their backs read, "Federal Bureau of Investigation and Food and Drug Administration." The room went completely still save for the mechanical clicking of the press cameras pivoting toward the entrance. The lead FBI agent held up his gold badge, his eyes sweeping the room with absolute authority until they locked directly onto the stage. "Nobody move," he commanded, his voice carrying the heavy, undeniable weight of federal law enforcement. "We have multiple federal warrants for this premises and the individuals involved in this corporate entity." My parents, completely panicked and still clinging to their deeply ingrained sense of upper-class entitlement, rushed forward to intercept the agents. My father puffed out his chest, stepping directly into the path of the lead investigator. "Excuse me, you are making a massive mistake," my father demanded, his voice shaking with desperate arrogance. "I am a prominent member of this community, and this is a private family event. I demand to speak to whoever is in charge of this ridiculous stunt." The federal agent did not even slow down. He completely ignored my father, brutally shoving his shoulder past him, as if he were nothing more than an inconvenient piece of furniture. "Step aside right now, sir, or you will be arrested for obstructing a federal raid," the agent warned sharply. My father stumbled backward, his face turning entirely pale as the reality of his utter powerlessness finally crashed down on him. My mother covered her mouth, letting out a terrified sob as the agents marched right past them, their heavy boots trampling all over the pristine white carpet Monica had so carefully selected. The agents reached the front of the room. Two of them flanked the staircase, while the lead investigator marched straight up the steps, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. Miles stood completely frozen near the podium. His expensive tailored suit suddenly looked far too big for his shrinking, defeated posture. He did not try to run. He simply raised his trembling hands in the air, his eyes darting frantically toward my parents for a rescue that was never going to come. Miles, you are under federal arrest for wire fraud, grand larceny, identity theft, and domestic money laundering, the agent announced loudly, grabbing my brother's arm and twisting it forcefully behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the microphone I was still holding. You have the right to remain silent, which I highly suggest you do, considering your complete financial history is currently being seized from your home server. The press pit went absolutely feral. Dozens of camera flashes strobed like lightning, capturing the golden boy of the family being publicly restrained like a common criminal. Monica watched her husband getting dragged away in steel cuffs, the realization hitting her like a freight train. Her stolen money, her massive house, her fake business, and her carefully crafted high society image were all evaporating into thin air. Her mind completely snapped. She let out an ear-piercing, hysterical shriek that sounded entirely inhuman. She lunged toward the glass pedestal, holding her cursed product, violently sweeping her arm across the top. The glass bottle of Riley's Glow shattered against the stage floor, spilling the toxic, chemical-laden lotion everywhere. You ruined my life, Monica screamed at me, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. She picked up a heavy promotional display board and hurled it blindly toward the press pit, nearly hitting a photographer. A female FBI agent immediately rushed forward to subdue her, grabbing Monica by the shoulders. Monica thrashed wildly, fighting the agent like a feral animal. "Get your hands off my expensive clothes!" she shrieked, throwing her head back and violently twisting her body to escape the agent's grip. But in her frantic, aggressive thrashing, her hand caught the edge of her own hair, or rather her expensive custom-made lace-front wig. With a vicious jerk of her body, the adhesive completely gave way. The luxurious, silky, straight hairpiece ripped completely off her head and tumbled onto the floor right next to the shattered glass. The entire room gasped in pure shock. Monica's actual hair was exposed to the blinding flashes of the cameras. Her edges were completely bald, severely damaged from years of using the exact same harsh, unregulated chemical straighteners she had secretly tried to force upon my innocent daughter. Her scalp was patchy and broken, the ultimate, undeniable physical proof of her deep-seated self-hatred and toxic vanity. She froze, her hands flying up to cover her exposed head, letting out a pathetic, whimpering cry. The FBI agent firmly pinned her arms behind her back, snapping a second pair of handcuffs into place. The press captured every single angle of her absolute humiliation. I stood quietly next to Kendrick, holding my beautiful daughter's hand, watching them drag the two architects of my misery out the back doors. They had built an empire on lies and poison, and I had just watched it burn completely to the ground. 6 months have passed since the heavy doors of the grand atrium swung shut behind my brother and his arrogant wife. The dust from the federal raid has finally settled, leaving a completely different landscape in its wake. Miles did not even try to fight the charges. When the federal prosecutors presented him with the 200 gigabytes of cloned forensic evidence I provided, his expensive legal team advised him to surrender immediately. He took a plea deal to avoid a lengthy public trial. Federal judges do not show any mercy whatsoever for individuals caught orchestrating millions of dollars in wire fraud and grand larceny against their own family members. Miles is currently serving a mandatory 12-year sentence in a federal correctional facility in upstate New York. He traded his custom-tailored suits for a standard-issue khaki uniform and his sprawling home office for an 8x10 concrete cell. Monica suffered an equally devastating fate. The Food and Drug Administration completely seized her fraudulent company. Civil lawsuits from terrified investors instantly drained whatever money the government did not freeze. The Internal Revenue Service audited her entire life, seizing the massive gated mansion, the luxury vehicles, and every single remaining designer handbag to pay back the stolen trust funds. Today, the woman who once looked down on me from her marble staircase is entirely bankrupt and publicly disgraced. She lives in a cramped, incredibly tiny one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. She has been permanently banned from every social media platform, her influencer career completely destroyed by the undeniable proof of her child endangerment and toxic vanity. She is entirely isolated, forced to finally face the ugly reality of the person she truly is. My parents, completely shattered by the absolute ruin of their golden child, suddenly found themselves alone. With Miles rotting away in federal prison and Monica completely broke, they miraculously remembered they had a daughter. Over the past few months, they made several desperate attempts to contact me. They left weeping voicemails, begging for forgiveness, claiming they were blinded by Miles, and deeply regretted casting me out. They wanted to rebuild our family, but I am not the naive, desperate woman who used to crave their toxic validation. I did not write them a long letter explaining my feelings, and I did not invite them over for a tearful reconciliation. I simply called my cell phone provider, permanently blocked both of their numbers, and instructed my neighborhood security to deny them entry at the gate. I established absolute, unbreakable boundaries. My peace is far too expensive to let them bankrupt it again. The money recovered from the trust fund has been safely secured in an airtight account for Zoe's future. Kendrick is thriving at his job, receiving a formal apology and a promotion from the school board. But the absolute greatest victory of all happened last night. Kendrick, Zoe, and I flew to New York City for a highly anticipated weekend trip to celebrate our new beginning. We wrapped ourselves in warm coats and stood in the center of Times Square, surrounded by the glowing screens and beautiful energy of the city. Zoe was practically vibrating with excitement, holding onto her father's hand tightly as we stared up at the dark digital billboard positioned right above the main intersection. At exactly 8 o'clock in the evening, the massive dark screen suddenly illuminated the entire busy street below. A breathtaking, high-definition image of my beautiful 8-year-old daughter flashed across the massive display. It was the official launch of the Target nationwide campaign. Zoe looked absolutely radiant, flashing a bright, confident smile. Her beautiful natural 4C hair was styled into a stunning, majestic braided crown, standing out proudly against the vibrant background of the advertisement. Below her face, the bold text simply read, "Celebrate your natural crown." People walking through the busy intersection actually stopped to admire the image. Zoe let out a joyful scream, jumping up and pointing at her own face, shining brightly over the greatest city in the world. Kendrick wrapped his arms around both of us, pulling us into a tight embrace. I looked up at my daughter's face, illuminating the night sky, knowing I had achieved total, absolute victory. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey today. Have you ever had to draw a hard line and cut off toxic family members to protect your peace? I would love to read about your victories in the comments below. Please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about surviving betrayal and healing. Remember, your best revenge is building a successful life your enemies can never touch. Stay strong, protect your boundaries, and I will see you next time.